Okay, in this video I'm going to talk about what you should consider when purchasing a keyboard for general typing or for programming, so for your next upgrade. And you may be thinking, well, any keyboard will do, right? Maybe that typical gaming keyboard is all you need. I'll be discussing the different keyboard layouts such as QWERTY, Dvorak, and Colmac, and why I prefer Workman. And I'll also be discussing the typical staggered layout and why it may be best for you to consider the ortholinear or the matrix or grid style layouts instead. Firstly, I'll talk about the QWERTY layout, and on this Wikipedia page we have an image to the right which will show you the QWERTY layout, so I'll click on that to bring up this image. Now if you are not familiar, the name of the QWERTY layout comes from the first 6 characters in the top left row of the layout. This is also the typical staggered layout that we are all familiar with, as opposed to the grid style layout that you will get with a numpad, for example. Now maybe thinking there's some ergonomic reason for the staggered layout. Maybe it has to do with how our fingers move, right? You bring your hands close together and put it on the keyboard, maybe it has to do with that, and how your fingers will move in that way. But if you're already familiar with touch typing, you'll know that that is simply not the case. You'll notice here that this is not a grid layout, it's sort of just skewed over slightly to the left. So the ergonomic argument doesn't hold here, because maybe for the right hand but not for the left hand. Moving your left index finger up, you have to choose between R and T. The equivalent for your right index finger is going to start at J. So either you can go up and press the U key, or you have to move over to the Y key. There's a difference between how far your left and right index fingers have to travel, from F to T and from J to Y. And I remember back in school when we learned touch typing, this was one of the first things that it just felt a bit unnatural, it felt a bit weird. The Y key just felt a bit off, but I never really thought about the layout all that much, so where the keys are located, or the staggered layout. You don't really think about it, you just study it, and it has become the norm. You really want the keys that are used most often to be distributed inside the natural range of motion of the fingers, and that is the goal with the Workman layout. As you can see on this image, it is even better on an ortholinear keyboard. The reason for that is if your keys are in a grid, that is going to minimize finger movement. This key usage image can be found on the workmanlayout.org website. The page details what led to the design of the Workman layout. You may be familiar with QWERTY and Dvorak. Dvorak was created in the 1930s and was supposed to be superior to QWERTY. There are also a few other keyboard layouts such as Colmac. This is the Dvorak layout, and there are quite a few problems with this. The layout is very unfamiliar, and if you have to do something like Ctrl X to cut or Ctrl C to copy and Ctrl V to paste, you can see that those keys are all over the place. Now if I switch over here to the Workman layout, you have X right here, C and V. Still there will be a learning curve with the Workman layout, so to switch from QWERTY to the Workman layout, but it's not completely unfamiliar. For the Dvorak layout, 31 keys are different from the QWERTY layout, whereas for the Workman layout only 21 characters are moved, that is again from the QWERTY layout. That being said, for the Colmac layout only 17 characters are moved, so for Colmac it's slightly less than for the Workman layout, but I still believe that the learning curve for the Workman layout is going to be worth the time investment, and that the extra effort to learn the Workman layout. The Workman layout takes into consideration frequently typed bigrams such as HE for when you type the or these and other words like that includes HE for example. The goal is to reduce sideways and twisting motions, and keys are optimized for the hand's natural range of motion. It is more natural for the fingers to move vertically than sideways. The Workman layout takes into consideration whether the particular finger is long, short, strong or weak, and frequently used keys are placed under the stronger fingers. Just like with any layout, there are some pros and cons to the Workman layout. It's not the QWERTY layout, so you will have to spend some time to get familiar with the new layout. And even if you switch only from the staggered layout to an ortholinear layout and you forget about doing Workman altogether, you will still have to get used to that grid layout. It's an interesting read, so I recommend that you check this website out. That is the workmanlayout.org website. While you can use any keyboard to start learning touch typing and to do programming, I would recommend that you look at keys such as the Razer Huntsman Mini, which is a 60% gaming keyboard, and this is just one brand. There are other brands that have a 60% keyboard or even a 40% keyboard. It's more or less more compact, so if you want to travel and take it with you, and then also you can always get a separate numpad to go with that. Moving on, I really like the Logitech Ergo K860 keyboard. And this is what I meant earlier in the video. You may expect with an ergonomical keyboard that your hands will be placed and be more natural in this position. But notice I still use the staggered layout. Now that may be fine if you don't want to switch from QWERTY to some other layout, and you're not so sure about the ortholinear or the grid layout just yet. Now I actually prefer the other one here from Microsoft. So this is the Microsoft Sculpt Ergonomic Keyboard. This is a separate number pad. If I go through here, up here actually, you can see that has a separate numpad, and it's very similar to the Logitech one that I mentioned previously. Notice again the staggered and the QWERTY layout. There are two categories of these keyboards to keep in mind. Single piece, also referred to as unibody keyboards, and then also split keyboards, where the keyboard is split into two halves. With the typical keyboard, the unibody keyboard, you have your hands close together. The unibody keyboard will be slightly more familiar, but the split keyboard will be slightly more ergonomical because you can place the two halves of the keyboard in a way that's more comfortable for you. So we've seen some unibody options with the Microsoft Sculpt and the Logitech Ergo keyboards. Now here with the Freestyle Pro from Kinesis, this is a very interesting keyboard. You can see it is a split keyboard and it has the staggered QWERTY layout, but this may be a good option for you. Next, this is one of my favorite keyboards, the Planck EZ. This is a really small 40% keyboard. It's a mechanical keyboard, but of course being so small it's very portable and it's backlit as well. Now with such a small keyboard, as I mentioned, you can have a separate numpad. Or what you can do with these Ergodox keyboards is you have multiple levels. So you can press a button to lower or raise the level. So instead of having a separate numpad, you can have a numpad layout on one of the other levels that you have. Also notice, I'll just scroll back up here. In this particular example, we do have the QWERTY layout, but notice that this is a ortholinear layout. And I actually do talk about that on the website. If I scroll down here, it is ortholinear, which is going to minimize finger movement. As I mentioned, it will take some time to get used to the keyboard, but I definitely think it's worth it. And as you can see, it is backlit as well. Another very useful thing is dual function keys. If you tap a key, then it does one thing. So if you tap Z, for example, then it's going to send that letter. But if you hold it down, then it can become a modifier such as Alt, just for example, and many other features here. Before showing you the next one, I would like you to think for a second what you're doing with your thumbs when you are typing or when you are using your mouse. Well, for the most part, you're pressing the space bar, right? And with the mouse, you are not actually doing much. It is just sitting there on your mouse. With that in mind, I'll move over to the Ergodox EZ keyboard. Click on Ergodox EZ. And you can see this is also a split keyboard. Move down here to a different view. You can see it is a split design. And you'll notice that you also have these thumb clusters. This allows you to do more with your thumbs. You're not just pressing spacebar. You can move keys over, such as home or end or delete. I'll just move back up here because they also have the Moonlander. So I'll go to that. The ZSA Moonlander Mark I, you can see this is very similar to the Ergodox EZ keyboard that I showed you previously. You have these thumb clusters. Now you have fewer keys for your thumbs, but that's fine. And it also has the split design. The Moonlander and the Ergodox EZ keyboards have this columnar layout. And that is a bit of a step up from the grid layout as well. It is still the grid layout, but it is columnar, so it conforms more naturally to your finger movement. So that's another interesting one for you. So I'm gonna move back to the Kinesis website, and this is the Advantage 2 keyboard. This may be a really weird keyboard if it's the first time you've seen it. It has a contoured keyboard layout. If I hover over this, I can sort of zoom in, and you can see it also has these thumb clusters. So you can have backspace and delete, and end and home and so on. Page up and page down and so forth you can have in those thumb clusters, so you do not have to move your hand to find those keys. And similarly, the numpad is sort of built in. You press a button to activate it and it's sort of built in, and you don't need a separate number pad. Going over some of the features, you have the concave key wells. The keys are split so that the arms can be positioned at shoulder width, and then you also have a grid layout as opposed to the staggered layout, even though this is a QWERTY keyboard. If I hover in here, it is QWERTY, but it is not the staggered layout. You'd have an option over here to press for Dvorak, so you can switch between QWERTY and Dvorak, for example. The only issue I have with the Advantage 2 is that it doesn't really feature backlighting, since I often work in low lighting conditions and there's always that one key that you forget where it is because you don't use it that regularly. I prefer keyboards with some backlighting, and while the keys are split, it is still a unibody keyboard, so you do not have two separate bars that you can adjust the way you want. It's still one of my favorite keyboards though, along with the Planck EZ keyboard. Previously I mentioned you should keep in mind what you are doing with your thumbs when you are considering your next keyboard. Well, the same thing applies with your mouse, because in creative programs such as Moto you have all of these spy menus. So if I do Alt Q, Then I can switch to edges, so I can switch my selection mode to the different modes up here. So instead of clicking up here, I can just press Alt Q. Then I get the spy menu and I can select my selection mode basically. And I can also choose between different tools such as transform, scale, and so forth. So if I want to transform, that'll bring up the transform tool. Now Alt Q may feel like a bit of a stretch for you to do, and you have many other pie menus in Modo as well. You can do Alt 2, and this allows you to choose your shading mode such as wireframe, or the scoot right here as well, reflection, and so forth. And you can create your own pie menus. Now I prefer pie menus over having a specific hotkey for all of the different tools that I use, because there are many tools. If you think about it for a second, if you are right-handed, then you have your left hand on the keyboard and your right hand on the mouse. So what you do not want to do in that case is to bring your right hand to the keyboard from the mouse in order to invoke some hotkey, but that may mean that you have to move your left hand instead, simply because there are so many tools. Or what you'll have to do is you'll have to do Control or Shift and then some buttons. So you'll have to start using modifiers. So you'll be doing quite a bit of stretching and back and forth to invoke those tools. So you do have various helpers in Modo, such as this thing right here, or you can click the buttons. Or in my case, I prefer the pie menus. Now what's nice is if you have those thumb clusters, then you have a few more buttons at your thumb. And then if you can get a mouse with a couple of thumb keys, that's also beneficial. Some of them only have 2, but you have a couple of options with 6 buttons for your thumb, or even 12 in some instances. That gives you options to customize the workflow to where you can put some of those hotkeys on the thumb clusters, whether it's on the keyboard or on the mouse. In terms of ergonomic mice, you have a few at Kinesis. So I'm at the Kinesis website again. My favorite here is this TXT mouse 2, the wireless one, and I'll just go to that. This is pretty much what it'll look like. This promotes a more vertical or neutral wrist posture. It does seem like a weird mouse, but it does make sense. The problem that I have with it is if I switch to this image, as with the typical mouse, you do not have thumb buttons. Now I'll move over to Razer again for a couple of examples. We have the Razer Naga Trinity. I'm just using Razer as an example again, but you can search for MOBA mice or MOBA gaming mice and you should find something like this. The goal is to have a thumb cluster, so buttons that you can use with your thumb. I'll just scroll down. With this particular mouse you have quite a few options. The side plates are interchangeable for a 2, 7 and 12 button configuration. And then we also have the Razer Naga Pro. Scrolling down we can see that we have 3 swappable side plates, a 2 button configuration, a 6 button configuration and a 12 button configuration as well. While it's advertised as a gaming mouse, you can start to think how it can improve your productivity in Modo or maybe in Visual Studio and some of the other applications that you use. If you are not familiar with touch typing and you are still hunting down keys with your index fingers, then it may be a good idea to start learning touch typing. It really won't take that long to learn. Maybe practice 15 minutes a day. There are quite a few resources available, so you can start learning touch typing by purchasing Mavis Beacon Teachers Typing. I actually started learning touch typing by using Mavis Beacon. And then you also have Type Easy from ereflect.com. This is also a paid option. What's great about learning touch typing from these applications is that you typically have games that you can play, so they mix things up quite a bit to keep it engaging. Then you have a couple of free options such as typingclub.com and also typingtest.com. So that is going to wrap up this video. The goal was not to cover every single keyboard and every single layout in all that much detail. The goal was just to try and inform you on the various options that you have available. And as I mentioned, touch typing has many advantages. It will reduce fatigue because you don't have to look up and down to hunt down keys with your index fingers. As also discussed, you can take it a step further and choose an ergonomical keyboard. And maybe you can choose an alternate layout such as the workman layout. The goal is to reduce the chance of developing injuries such as repetitive strain injury or tendonitis, and ultimately to improve your typing speed so that you can be more productive and so that you can be more comfortable. Alright, that is going to be it for this video. I'll see you next time.